So here today, I'm going to talk about a specialism. So Hannah's question is quite relevant. So it was almost like a sort of, Blue Peter handover there. So thank you for asking that question. But as we go around coaching our clients, we come across various different themes, which tell us there's a need in a certain area. And one of those themes is around women, particularly women in leadership roles and women who have got to a point in their careers and in their organizations where they're heading to more senior positions. So I think it's kind of commonly known that there isn't an issue around gender equality in organizations as women start their careers. But as you go up an organization and the pyramid that you get in an organization in terms of the number of people at the top, you get fewer and fewer women at the top. And that's why this is one of our specialisms. But before I say anything more, I want to put in a caveat. So yes, I'm going to talk a lot about women in leadership. But in reality, the coaching conversations that we have with men often focus on the same issues. So I'm deliberately talking about women, but the things that I'm going to talk about definitely apply to people in all parts of organizations, at all levels in organizations, and all genders, whatever, like Adrian was talking about, the various differences that we might have as human beings, they do apply to everybody. So I don't actually want anybody to feel excluded as a result of me talking and focusing on a specialism. But I think sometimes, focusing in on something can be a helpful activity to do. So that's my caveat. So just a little bit about me, because not everybody will know me. My name is Liz Codd, and my corporate career was in HR. Sometimes I don't like to admit that because doesn't always make you very popular, but I have had a wonderful corporate career in HR, which I really, really enjoyed and found very engaging. I was a HR business partner for a lot of it and an HR leader. I spent 4 years in Japan looking after the HR function for Fidelity International, and 4 years in Hong Kong as the head of HR for the Asia Pacific region. So I hate, unlike Adrian and your show-off slides, I don't like doing this bit. I hate talking about myself. And in the final 4 years of my corporate career, I was responsible for leadership development and coaching at Fidelity. And I suddenly realized after spending, 25 years or something as an HR business partner, that this leadership development stuff is so much more fun than running compensation cycles. But I came to that rather late, unfortunately. And then in 2016, I decided it was time to head off and do something a little bit different. And I got to that point where I thought, it's kind of now or never. I'm either going to carry on with my corporate career, or I'm going to be brave and take a risk and do something different. And I decided that if I didn't, I would regret it. And so I took courage in both hands and became an independent executive coach. And at that point, Chris very kindly asked me if I'd like to become a director of Leadenhall Consulting, because we'd known each other for many years. And so I'm also the Chief Coaching Officer of Coaching on Demand, which you'll hear about a little bit more. So that's certainly enough on me. So one of the interesting roles that I've ended up with is I've become an agony aunt for the CFA UK. So the CFA is an institute that looks after the financial analysts who work in the investment and asset management area. And so I think there are 11,000 members in the UK. So these are people who've passed exams or in the process of passing exams to become an investment professional. And this is one of the questions that I was asked recently. I've been doing this probably, 2 or 3 years now, and I get very interesting questions. But this was the question that I was asked. So I'm feeling very deflated because I'm trying to take a next step in my career, but I'm being turned down at interview stage. At the last interview, I was told I was too long-winded. When I see women in top jobs, I ask myself, how did they get there? What do I need to do? How do I need to be? What is it that I am doing that is not working? Thank you. So I haven't given you my answer. You can read it on the CFA UK website if you would like to see the answer to that question, and many others. But it's just a very, very typical question that I think women, as they progress through their careers, find themselves asking. You know, I don't know what I have to do to be successful. It's not obvious to me. So that's, I think it makes it a very interesting specialism. But like Adrian, really, I want to make sure that I've got some data behind what I'm telling you today, and it's not just my opinion, because, you know, one person's opinion is perhaps not so valuable. So I thought, well, I'll rummage around and see what I can find out to support this area. And I don't know if any of you have looked into the gender pay gap data recently, but it was really fascinating. I think I could spend half an hour standing here talking to you about gender pay and gender gaps generally, and discovered that. I'm not going to be only UK focused, actually, but in the UK, we have to report on, organisations have to report on their gender pay gap, and normally it would be reported in April, but because of the pandemic, they delayed it to October. So I don't actually have October 2021 figures yet, but basically the gender pay gap is getting worse in the UK. It's getting bigger. It's not getting smaller. So we've been reporting on it since, I think, 2017, and each year it's got bigger. So then I looked at other data and I thought, well, I mustn't be just too UK focused. So I came across, and this might be interesting for those of you in HR particularly. There's if you're not aware of it, there's a Global Institute for Women's Leadership. And they do lots of work around helping women to progress their careers and develop in terms of leadership. And I'm reading it here because there's a lot of detail, and the pictures that are on the screen are getting in the way of what I can see. So I apologise if you think, well, why is she reading it? But that's why. So they did a report covering 6 countries in terms of the gender pay gap, and this came out in this month. So this is hot off the press information. And the countries they covered were Australia, France, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, and the UK. And they used the data from the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap report, which is also from 2021. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and you see if you can guess the answers, or maybe you know the answers because you've studied the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap report. Anyway, so it covered 156 countries, and they're measuring more than just the pay gap. They're measuring sort of economics and politics and that kind of thing as well. And so of these 156 countries, which country do you think came top as in having the narrowest gap in terms of gender differences? Who wants to? Sweden? Good. Sweden is number 5. Any others? Finland's in the top 5. Spain is also up there. No, I'll put you out of your misery. I don't know if anybody put it in the chat, Ed. No, it's Iceland. So there you go. So where do you think the UK might be? 12? No, a bit worse. Any other? It's like an auction, isn't it? 17th? No, it's 23. 23. What about Australia? Where do you think Australia might be? 50. Surprising, isn't it? Well, it surprised me anyway. So according to this World Economic Forum, I will get back to the topic shortly, but I just found this fascinating data. So according to the World Economic Forum report, it will take 135 years to close the gender gap worldwide. So, I mean, that's shocking, staggering, unacceptable in my humble opinion. So I've included some other studies just to show you that this, there's a set of data around this whole topic which we need to pay attention to. So in 2019, S&P Global did a study, and they discovered these things: that firms with female CEOs and CFOs produce superior stock price performance compared to the market average. In the 24 months post-appointment, female CEOs saw a 20% increase in stock price momentum. And as far as S&P Global are concerned, this is economically and statistically significant. So sometimes it's hard to make the business case for focusing on women and developing women as leaders. But I think these studies, and there's another organisation that's done a lot in this area, and that's McKinsey. They've been reporting on why diversity matters since 2015. And this is the point where I was going to wave things at you, but I've actually forgotten. So for example, this is the report that McKinsey is producing every year since 2015, talking about why diversity matters. And it's not just gender diversity. So this is all well and good. Organisations are struggling, but what should we do about it? Oh, sorry, one last thing. So Harvard Business Review have written a guide for women at work. And they have this to say, that women are less likely, this is partly why there's an issue. Women are less likely to be given credit for their work, tend to command lower salaries, are less likely to be promoted, especially to key leadership and C-suite positions. Due to gender biases in our culture, in our cultures, women often struggle to make their voices heard, avoid getting involved with office politics, and shy away from negotiating for the roles and salaries they deserve. While systemic biases are not women's problems to solve, they still need to navigate around them to reach their career goals. They can break past these biases and become more effective in the workplace and take more control of their careers. And I thought, well, that says it in a nutshell, really, why this is such an important specialism, why it's an important topic for organisations. So organisations will be better, stronger, more successful, performance results will be better if there is diversity at the top of their organisations, and that is not just gender diversity. So what are the options? Well, so organisations obviously can focus on women as a group in their, and they do things like development programs specifically for women. They can set up women's networks. They can set up mentoring. And there's many and creative solutions to this problem being developed and implemented by organisations. It costs a lot of money. It does cost a lot of money, and I'm not convinced that everything I've read is that it's not achieving the results that organisations really want it to achieve. And there is still not enough women in senior positions in organisations. So, of course, there is another option, and that's to look at each woman as an individual and help each woman as an individual to develop. And that's where coaching comes in. So finally, I've got round to coaching women for leadership. And we would say this, wouldn't we? Because we're a coaching organisation, but we do see it as being a very, very effective solution because it meets the woman at the point she is in her career, in her experience, which is unique to her, in the context of an organisation, which will also be, to a large extent, unique. And we don't think that there isn't one size that fits all, really. And it's such a fantastic investment to give a woman a coach, especially senior women in leadership. So a group of our coaches at Leadenhall got together, some of who are here today, and we said, okay, if this is a specialism that we want to be able to talk to our clients about, what is it as a coaching program or coaching conversations? What are the themes? What are the key focus areas that we would need to be ready to coach on? And we did, it wasn't a group of women, it was a gender diverse group of people, and these are some of the things that we came up with in terms of the themes. And anybody who knows me at all will know I like a model, so we turned our themes that we identified into a model. So the first area we looked at is a woman's identity as a leader, and I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about these headings that we've got here. So signature presence, being visible, purpose and courage. Then there's something around being able to demonstrate strategic acumen. And we had a bit of a lively debate around this, whether women are seen as not being strategic. Some people think that's the case, others weren't so sure. But being visionary and demonstrating credibility fall into that category. Then we had the general area of impact and influence. So there's a view that women are not so good at shouting about their achievements, and so how can they do that in a constructive way? Sometimes there are issues around confidence. Come on to talk about imposter syndrome or phenomenon, depending on which is your preference, and negotiating for things like promotions and salaries, as well as negotiating in the course of their roles. And then having an integrated life. So a lot of the time we talk about work-life balance. And again, if you know me, you'll know that I have a bit of an aversion to talking about that, because it's almost like, well, if your life wins, your work loses, or if your work loses, your life wins. Well, that can't be right, because work is a wonderful thing, and is a big part of our whole lives, but it's by no means all. So we've looked at how to have an integrated life rather than work-life balance, but it's a sort of around the same topic. So I'm very pleased to see people taking photographs of my model. Must be all right, mustn't it? I quite like the colours. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about now each of those areas. So the first thing we would do in terms of the coaching conversations we're actually having with women is to get them to step back and reflect on, well, let's think about what has your experience been up to this point in terms of your upbringing, your background, your family experience, and then into the world of work and your career so far. So a real opportunity to reflect and make sure that they're not sort of thinking too narrowly about themselves. And in coaching, we talk about self-limiting assumptions or self-limiting beliefs. So what are the things that I might be believing about myself that aren't actually true and are holding me back? So it's a whole opportunity to step back and reflect and look at things from a different perspective and get a new perspective as a result of that. And then to think about the organisation they're in. So each organisation will have its own way of handling how people progress in that organisation. And there are lots of cultural things, unwritten rules, as well as the written rules, which quite often are the things that has the least impact on how people actually progress. So having a really good understanding of how does somebody make progress, assuming that they aspire to a more senior leadership position, how do they do that in this organisation? So I think that's sometimes people make assumptions about how that works in an organisation rather than really finding out and asking the people around them, well, how do I get on in this organisation? Another really important area is establishing a unique and authentic leadership identity centred around purpose. So sometimes I think if there are not many female role models in an organisation, or the role models are people who've grown up, are a generation above, it may be difficult to figure out, okay, well, who am I as a leader? Who do I want to be as a leader? And how can I really be myself as well as being a leader? And in my experience, many people find themselves in leadership roles not because they desperately want to be a leader, but because they're really good at their job, or they've always been very responsible. And, if they say they're going to do something, they do it. They're a safe pair of hands. They may be technically excellent. There are all sorts of reasons why people then end up in leadership positions and haven't really thought about, well, who am I as a leader? Who do I want to be? What kind of reputation do I want to have in my organisation or in my career? And this is pretty central, I think, to helping a woman to develop as a leader and to really own that role as a leader. So I think building on that is this idea of presence. So there's been quite a few books written by people like Amy Cuddy about executive presence as a woman. Because there aren't always a lot of role models. So really understanding, well, how do I want to come across to other people? What kind of presence do I want to have when I walk into the room? I think being clear about those things are really important. And they're not generally things we think about terribly much, I don't think. And courage is very important. And I go back to my caveat. This is not only about women, of course it's not. It's about all of us. So I don't want to exclude anybody, but sometimes it's necessary to have courage if you don't see lots of women around you in leadership positions. Sometimes you have to be the person that sort of steps forward, and that does take a lot of courage. And depending on the organisation that the woman is in, it might take a great deal of courage. So I'm not going to cover all of these because it would take too long. This is an important one. So taking more risks with assignments, jobs, and career moves. I think we've all heard that anecdote about, if you give a man a list of things and which are the requirements for a job, if they can do 6 of them, they'll apply. For a woman, it has to be 9 or 10. It's that kind of idea, and that women perhaps are a little less willing to take a risk and say, well, I can do quite a lot of that job, so I'll just give it a go. So we can encourage women to be more confident to take those risks, because generally speaking, they will be able to do the job if they can do 5 or 6 of the things on the list. Another thing that's really important for all of us is making sure that we have a support group around us. So sometimes people call this a career board. I don't know if you've heard of that term before, but basically asking people, explicitly saying to people, I want to take on this bigger challenge. I'd really appreciate your support in doing that. And that might be support in terms of encouragement and confidence building. It might be giving constructive feedback, making sure that they're not sort of missing things or blindsided in any kind of way. So I think I wish I had done that as I was developing in my career. In fact, I'd wish I'd had a coach to help me with being a leader. I think I sort of feel like I'd have achieved a lot more if I'd had a coach, which says something for coaching, doesn't it? Being assertive, navigating difficult situations, and embracing constructive conflict. So when we are doing team coaching, we often talk about constructive conflict, because I think a lot of people really prefer to avoid conflict. But actually, if a woman can be coached to embrace conflict and not shy away from it, they can achieve a lot more. And that's being willing to, say the difficult things, be challenging, having your own opinion, not just going with the flow, that kind of thing. And that's not easy to do. If these things don't come naturally to us, it's not easy to figure out, okay, well, what's my approach going to be? What's my strategy going to be? How am I going to behave in this situation in order to demonstrate I've got a view and I'd like it to be listened to, that kind of thing. I've already mentioned about having a broad network of supporters. Imposter phenomenon, or some people call it syndrome, is really common. And I have coached quite a few women who struggle with this. So the inner critic is saying, you're no good, you're not good enough, you have to be perfect, all those kinds of things. And those are things that we often develop through our childhoods in our families. And Adrian mentioned that sometimes coaches get people to write stories. So there are stories we tell ourselves, and if we're not careful, stories which are no longer true carry on repeating in our heads. And so coaching can be a lot to do with, well, let's write a new story, let's come up with a new inner dialogue, which will enable you to achieve what you're truly capable of, rather than it holding you back and reinforcing your self-limiting beliefs. So yes, sometimes I think women fall into the trap of doing what's needed in organizations. They see a need and they want to respond to that need, and end up spending their time on things that are actually not progressing their careers, not necessarily leadership activities. Might be, for example, a bit more administrative related. And so it's good to encourage women to think about, okay, what are the things you can do to take a broader view and have a bigger impact, and to manage a broader set of stakeholders. The double bind, I don't know if you've come across a double bind, but it's this factor that means that as a woman becomes more competent, she appears to become less likable and less warm, which is very difficult, because competence is obviously really critical, and you don't want to feel like you have to apologize for being competent. But in order to build relationships, you've also got to be warm, and people would much prefer to work with others who are likable. I think there was a study done, which is, if you had to choose between somebody who's super intelligent but not particularly likable, and somebody who's really likable but perhaps not quite as intelligent, maybe not quite as good as their job, actually most people will pick the likable person, not the person who's most intelligent or the best at their job. So it's important. Likability is an important factor, but not at the expense of competence. And yes, coming to the managing an integrated life. So, and we do at Leadenhall, we do parental transition coaching as well, which is obviously when a new child comes into the family, or a baby or a child comes into the family. And I've got a great model that I like to use to help people, men and women, to figure out how do I get all of these very, very critical aspects of my life to work together and help each other. And so I'm not having to make huge sacrifices between this or that. It's not this or that. So in conclusion, I've talked about my caveat a couple of times because I hate to think that anybody in the room and on the Zoom would feel excluded. But coaching is very personalised to each woman or each man, and therefore I do think it's highly effective. So when I was responsible for leadership development at Fidelity, I was constantly struggling with this idea that you can run leadership development programs, but will people change when they get back to their desk? I mean, that is such a fundamental problem with leadership development programs. With coaching, I think that is much, much less of an issue because you are talking to the individual about what are you going to do when you get back to your desk? What is going to be different? What will you change? And therefore, I think applying some of the things that you're learning about yourself and about your environment are much easier to apply as a result of a coaching conversation. And I fundamentally believe that organizations are better, stronger when they have a diverse leadership team at the top, and diversity in all respects, whether that's gender, whether that's cognitive diversity, the way people think. So thank you for listening to me and for smiling at me and taking pictures. And if anybody's got any questions, we might have time for a very quick one, possibly. Hopefully not. I'm not very good at answering questions on the spot. I don't like being put on the spot. So that's put you all off, hasn't it? No? Cool. Thank you very much.